Good afternoon. I'm Jim Huggett with J.F. Huggett Custom Furniture. I'm here with Joshua Farnsworth Wooden Shop in his lovely classroom in Earlysville, Virginia. Joshua has asked me to come in and talk about how to cut half-blind dovetails. And so that's the purpose of today's discussion. A half-blind dovetail is a typical joinery process for drawer fronts. As you can see, that's maybe better there. It allows the front of the drawer to be clean, while the side of the drawer takes advantage of the strength and the elegant beauty of a solid dovetail. So the wood I'm using here is sapelli, and the side is poplar. So I'm going to take you through the process. I want to say a few things about half-blind dovetails, or dovetails in general, actually. It's a historic joinery technique, but originally it was not considered something you'd want to look at. So traditional woodworkers back in the 1700s and 1800s would hide the dovetails. But with machine processing taking the lead in most furniture, people began to look at hand-cut dovetails as an elegant feature in a lot of furniture, and of course it adds a tremendous amount of strength. So there's not one way to cut dovetails. There are hundreds of different variations. I've seen them myself. I started cutting dovetails 25 or 30 years ago, and my first introduction to both half-blind and full dovetails was from an author named Peter Korn. I don't even remember the name of the book. And I sort of adopted his methodology. And over the years, as I learned more and did more and more dovetails myself, I've modified what I started with to the point where it's probably not recognizable. Peter wouldn't even know what I was doing. But what I suggest is you start with a baseline process, maybe this one, maybe some other, and then elaborate on it, experiment with it, get better at it, and you'll find your own way. Three things to think about with dovetails. There are really three elements. There's the layout, and there's the saw work, and there's the chisel work. If you get the layout right and you do the saw work well, the chisel work is pretty straightforward. You're not going to screw up a dovetail with your chisels, but you can screw up a dovetail with your saw work, and you certainly can screw up a dovetail if your layout isn't effective and accurate. So that's one thing to think about. Also, just as a starting point, two things to think about when you're getting started. Make sure your wood is square or it'll make you miserable. So square up your drawer parts before you start. Make sure they're clean and square. And also make sure your tools are sharp. Make sure your chisels are... I sharpen my chisels before I start dovetails, and then I hone them as I go to keep them sharp throughout. And it makes a tremendous amount of difference because you require a much less pressure on the chisels themselves. So if that's my introduction, it's probably time to start cutting a dovetail. So let's start with a dovetail. The first thing to think about is layout and setting the marking gauge. This is your primary tool for layout. There are a couple of different marking gauges available, but this is the one I like. This wheel gauge gives you a nice clean cut. I generally set the gauge to the thickness of the side piece of the wood by setting it down on the table, as I did, and then refining it with just the touch of my finger as I go along. Okay, think we got it? So, before I start to actually mark it, what I'm going to do, and as I always do with any drawer, is I decide what my drawer pieces are going to be. So this is the left side, inside of a drawer, and this would be the face, and this would be the inside of the drawer. And the inside of the drawer, I'll put a mark. And that mark reminds me that that's where the dado needs to go for the drawer bottom. Same thing here. And then I number the four corners. This is corner number 1. This would be corner number 2, which we won't do today. This would be corner number 3 would be back here, and corner number 4 would be right here. Okay, the first step is to take the drawer side and use the marking gauge on the front and the back. And remember, since these are the tails, you're also going to have to clear the top and the bottom. Okay, for the drawer face, make sure you pay attention to which side is out, because you don't want to mark that. It's really hard to make it go away. And do the same thing, mark the inside of the drawer face. And then mark the side. Okay, in the layout for the tails, this is the bottom. I bring up the bottom tail up a half an inch. That allows this channel, this dado for the bottom of the drawer to clear the edge of this tail, so I don't have to do a stop dado. On the top, then, since there's no dado to worry about, I'll use a 1/4 inch gap. Now the process is to lay out the tails in whatever pattern you like. I generally try to make them not even, so that when you look at the side of the drawer, you can tell that the drawer is handmade and it doesn't look like a machine did it. The other thing that I do is I use a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch gap between the tips of the tails, because if you do them with a machine, you can't get anything smaller than 1/4 inch. So when you look at it, see an 1/8 inch, you know that it was a hand-cut dovetail. I use an 1/8 inch, even though I think if it was smaller, it might look better. But an 1/8 inch is the smallest chisel I have, so I can get an 1/8 inch chisel in there. So let's mark these and lay them out. I went 1 1/8 inch there, 1 1/8 inch there. So the first tail at the top will be about 1 1/8 inch long. And we'll just do three dovetails here, since this is a demo. You could do more if you want, but 3 is plenty for strength. Then I take my 1/8 inch chisel and I hold it here and make a mark on either side of the layout line, and that gives me an 1/8 inch gap. Okay, so we laid out the distance that we want the tails to sit, and now we're going to lay out the angles. This is about an 8-degree dovetail template. I've had it about 25 years, so it's been around a long time, but it works well, and I use it for everything. So I'm going to use this to mark the angles on this board. I'm going to try and do it left-handed so you can see it. So I'm running the line between the scribe line that I did down here and up to the line at the end of the board. It's harder left-handed. And that gives us the layout for our dovetails. We will be taking off this wood. Now I'd flip the board over normally, and I will flip it over and carry those marks over to the other side, and we'll put them on this side. And that gives us the mark on both sides of the board. Now the next step is one that not everybody does, but I find it helpful, and that is to take a chisel and put it carefully and lightly on the scribe line and make sure it's square and just tap it. And notice that the bevel of the chisel is into the waste. Okay. And what this does for us is gives us a place to set the saw blade to make sure the cut is square when we start to do the cut. So when you start the saw cut, you start it on the corner, and the first thing I do is I lift it up into the kerf to get it set perpendicular, and then I begin to drop it down the line. So I'll do 2 or 3 strokes down and 1 stroke up, 2 or 3 strokes down and 1 stroke up. I'm watching the bottom of the kerf so that it doesn't go beyond my scribe line. And that's a good cut. So I'll do the other 3 that are at this angle, and then I'll reverse the angle. Okay, now we're ready to take the waste out of the middle of this. The first step here after the saw cuts is to pare back to the scribe line, and that gives you a clean shoulder. So with a sharp chisel, a very slight cut, that's all you need. And as you tap for the scribe line, do so gently because the chisel will want to dent your scribe line. So just a slight tap is all you need. And then pare it back. Okay, now I typically work from the face side, outside of the drawer side here, to the inside because you get a better, cleaner cut when on the side you're working on than you do on the inside. But the next step is to go back and increase the depth of the cut line at the base of the socket. Then with an 1/8 of an inch chisel, I just begin to pop it out. Now some people use a bandsaw or a coping saw and take this out, take a lot of the waste out, but I actually find that's harder because I can just pop it. Now when I get about halfway down, I'll flip this over, do another cut, then I will flip this over, and start from the other side. One thing you might notice, both on the tails and the pins, is that when I place the chisel in the socket, I'm placing it with a slight back angle, and the purpose of the back angle is to create a very slight back angle on the socket itself. There's no glue advantage at all on the back of these sockets. They don't hold anything. All of the glue strength comes from the sides of the tails here. So getting that back a little bit and out of the way enables the tails to fully close in the sockets. Now we're going to flip it over and come in from the other side. And the same process. And these two sockets are done. Now we need to take care of the shoulder, socket shoulders here. Now, to take these out is actually saw work, and I can get them right along this line about 80% of the time. The other percent of the time I may cut into my edge there, and it shows in the dovetail. So what I tend to do is, on the back of the drawer, I will cut them all the way to the edge. And if I'm off a little bit, it doesn't really matter in the back. In the front of the drawer, I tend to leave a probably more 64th at the least, and then clean it up with a chisel afterwards. So I'm just going to cut them with a saw here, and we'll see how it works out. But let's see how I did. Good. I'm right down that line. I don't know if you can see it. I've cut the shoulders with the saw, and now I'm going to pare them down. This one just a little bit proud on the inside. This is really easy with a sharp chisel, and it's a pain in the neck with a dull chisel. There we go. Now they're clean. Both shoulders are clean, and the tails are ready. They will be my template now for laying out the pins. Line up the top and bottom edges of the drawer, and line the ends of the dovetails right on your kerf line, on your scribe line. Okay, I have my lines. Now I do something here a little different. I'm going to reinforce these lines with a chisel as I did for the tails, but you recall they always tell you to cut inside the line. Rather than try and cut inside the line, I'm going to lay the chisel inside the line and then I will lay the knife right inside the chisel cut. So I am 1/100 of an inch inside that line. It is barely anything, just so that I can see the line in the chisel. Now, if you're using a real dark wood like walnut and you can't see this, then you can put masking tape across the face here, and it'll cut through the masking tape and give you a nice mark. And that's it. We're going to take this out. Okay, this is waste. Okay, I'm going to pare these back and then we'll put them in the vise and cut them with a saw. Start on the edge. I'm going to run the blade right on my chisel line. You don't want to cut beyond the scribe line because these are your drawer sides and that will show. The inside doesn't matter that much, and some people actually cut this very deep to the inside of the drawer because it leaves less waste in there to have to get at with a chisel, but I don't do that because I like the way they look and they clean on the inside of the drawer. We've cut the kerfs for the pins, and now we're going to remove the waste. And this will be a challenge because the kerf is at a 45-degree angle across the top, across the corner. So we'll have to do some chisel work to clean out the inside corners. A lot of people actually drill this out. I don't, but I could, just to get as much of the waste out as possible and then go in and finish it with a chisel. But I like to work the chisel for the whole piece. So I'll get started and you can watch. Once again, I'm holding the chisel at a slight angle, cutting back into the board so that it is a little bit concave. Now the trick here is that because the socket flares, you have to be careful in pulling out these pieces not to break off the horns of the pins. So the trick to that is you get a couple of free cuts as you close up the kerf, but after you get 1/8 of an inch or so out, then you've got to start to take these corners off before you lift. So we're about a 1/64 of an inch above the cut line. I'm going to reinforce my saw kerf, and then I will take a wider chisel, put it in my kerf, and tap it. And I have a nice flat bottom. I'll clean it out. I'm looking, sighting down the scribe line to see if I have a bulge in there, and apparently I do. So I'll just pare that back. And we have a socket. I'm going to go and I'll cut these last two off camera. You don't have to sit around and watch that. And then we'll try and dry fit. Okay, I think we've got it. We're going to try and a dry fit here, see how it works. Things to be careful of here are if this is if it's too tight, you can get splits, and it'll split right down here in the poplar. It won't split the Zappelli, but it will split the poplar. So I'm looking at this, and it's starting to push the edge of the poplar up a little bit on that center tail. So I'll clean that just a little bit more. You don't have to take off much. And there it is, a blind dovetail. Well, thanks for watching this video at Wood & Shop Traditional Furniture, and I had a good time. Thank you.
This is Joshua Farnsworth. If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking with hand tools, visit my website at woodandshop.com, where you can find free video tutorials, workshop tours of amazing traditional woodworkers, and tool buying guides. You can ask questions and share your projects with thousands of woodworkers on my free traditional woodworking forum. Make sure you subscribe to my regular blog posts, and also check out my 10 steps for getting started in traditional woodworking. Enjoy!